Isabella was born into the royal family of France late in the 13th century. The actual date of her birth has been disputed but is thought to lie be 1295 to 1296. These dates come from a papal dispensation for her marriage when she was aged 10 in 1305 by Pope Clement V, and she was aged 12 by the time of her marriage in 1308. Her father was King Philip IV of France and her mother Queen Joan I of Navarre, monarchs of France at a time when France was one of the superpowers of Europe. She would be one of 7 children born to her parents, but 3 of her siblings would die in childhood. All 3 of her brothers both would ascend to the throne of France, Louis X, Philip V and Charles IV. All 3 of her brothers both would ascend to the throne of France, Louis X, Philip V and Charles IV. Isabella's marriage to the son of King Edward I of England was purely a political one. Her father, Philip, sought the marriage as a bargaining tool to resolve England's continental claims to French provinces of Anjou, Aquitaine, Gascony, and Normandy. Edward I of England was married to King Philip's sister, Margaret. This would make Isabella's aunt also her stepmother by the time she would marry Edward. Edward had looked at other potential brides for his son, but Isabella's dowry was too great an offer to turn down. Also, at this time Edward I would be looking for other marriages for political advantage for England, but none were found before his death in 1307, and the wedding between Edward and Isabella would go ahead in Boulogne-sur-Mer in northern France on 25 January 1308. Isabella would find life at the English court tough. When she first arrived at the age 12, her new husband was already in a deep relationship with Pierre Gaveston, 1st Earl of Cornwall. She would even be sidelined at the wedding table by Edward in favor of Gaveston, much to disgust of Isabella's relatives attending the wedding ceremony, her uncles Louis, Count of Avaux, and Charles, Count of Valois. It would take the King of France, Philip IV, to intervene, when Isabella raised concerns to her father, for Edward II to treat his new wife with the appropriate respect. The Plantagenet court of Edward II was a difficult one for Isabella to navigate. Whilst Edward favoured Gaveston over his wife, Isabella's father, Philip IV, would fund the barons, led by Thomas of Lancaster, against Edward. Eventually, Edward would be forced to exile Gaveston to Ireland. Once Gaveston was exiled and the Queen's role more secured at court, Isabella's father would stop supporting the barons. Eventually, Gaveston would return from his exile in Ireland and form an alliance with both the King and Queen. Even Thomas II, Earl of Lancaster, would seem to be an ally of Gaveston. During this period Isabella would build her own power base at court, mainly from the French-originated Beaumont family, who were opponents of Lancaster family. In 1311, Isabella and her husband would barely escape with their lives or capture after a failed campaign in Scotland. This failure would lead Edward into the barons at Edward Court, rising up against him. Her husband would also find himself in conflict with not only the Scots but also from his own barons. This would include his own cousin, Thomas II, Earl of Lancaster. The barons' uprising would lead to civil war, and Isabella would support her husband, requesting support from France from her uncles Louis and Charles. In the conflict against the barons, Edward and Isabella were forcefully separated at Tynemouth Priory in Northumberland in northern England. Edward would escape with his life, but his close friend Pierre Gaveston was captured at Scarborough Castle in Yorkshire. Gaveston was executed by men under the orders of Guy de Beauchamp, 10th Earl of Warwick.